Welcome everyone to the Interoperability Roundtable. This is an open forum fostering conversations around interoperability. My name is Jake Tunney, product manager at Leap Orbit, and I'm lucky enough to be your MC today. And I'm happy to announce that you can now find this conversation on Spotify. We're joined today by hosts David Finney and Mrinal Bhasker, co-founders of Leap Orbit. Leap Orbit is the trusted innovation partner to many of the biggest market-leading health data networks, including CRISP, Manifest Medics, and Sync Health, as well as the policymakers who oversee them. We are currently working on improving the accuracy and accessibility of provider data with our product Convergent, a provider directory API as a service. Convergent also assists plans to comply with the CMS interoperability rule. And today, we are opening access to our provider data API via a free private beta. And you can sign up for that. There'll be a limited number of spots, up to 100 people, at leaporbit.com/private-beta. And I'll be dropping this in the chat after, so you can grab that link. Today, we are joined by Karsten Russell Wood. Karsten has over 20 years of healthcare solution management, spanning care segments from intensive to acute to post-acute, as well as pop health-centric specialization, including neonatal, fetal and maternal, and chronic patients. He has product management experience in capital equipment and health informatics, and currently leads the telehealth portfolio of Phillips Health for remote patient monitoring in the ambulatory sector, tele-ICU, EICU, and clinical surveillance. And before we jump into our topics, just a reminder that we encourage audience participation. So please comment your questions for Karsten, David, and Mrinal in the chat. Okay, David, do you have our topics handy that we can kick off with Karsten?
I do. Karsten, first of all, thanks for joining us. Maybe before too long, we'll do one of these in person, actually. I feel like we're finally getting close. To start, can you orient us a little bit to sort of your portfolio at Phillips? What lines of business are you responsible for?
Yeah, good morning and happy to be here. So really, David, when I think of what's a portfolio manager, I always think about looking at money, right? So if we think about the relationship between a stockbroker and a mutual fund manager, a stockbroker really looks at maximizing, the value of a single equity. While the mutual fund manager really tries to partner with organizations and individuals to optimize kind of their goals and then align the goals with the outcome. That's how Phillips has reconstructed their teams to really make sure that we're not missing the opportunity to leverage the breadth of the Phillips portfolio, from personal health to image-guided therapy through precision diagnostics and connected care. So my domain of interest and certainly passion as well is the post-acute and home. This spans not only a hospital's endeavor to reach into the home, thanks to COVID, but also our lives as consumers, which are now more motivated than ever to participate in our health. So that's how I would explain it.
Okay, so today's conversation is really well timed, because this was like lightning striking twice. Yesterday, there was an article in Axios about hospital at home and sort of the arrival of that as a concept during COVID. And then I don't know if you guys get the HisTalk email, but there was some deal flow in the hospital at home space that was also announced yesterday. And then when I was driving home from the gym last night, NPR had a segment on hospital at home. So we've got the man who can answer this question. What is that? We've been, home care has been a thing. Medicare pays for it. There is rehab that happens at home. Why suddenly is this like clearly the hot button phrase that people are talking about, and what makes it new?
Yeah, it's disappointing that it's come to this point because no longer can we be referred to as futurists, right? We're now realists. So I don't know if I like that as much. It's not quite as appealing. But David, you're right, and a couple things have happened. First and foremost, COVID didn't start the fire. The migration to home has been trending for quite some years, especially across organizations that are orienting towards value-based care versus fee for service. We see organizations, especially like the Veteran Affairs, the VA, moving to help and deliver care where it's most efficient, not simply reducing it to the most common treatment care setting, such as the hospital. But we also see what the impact of COVID has done, right? COVID has made populations sensitive to leaving their safety zones, their homes, and moving into a hospital for treatment. And of course, in contrast to that, we see hospitals that weren't seeing patients, right? Their elective surgery centers were closed. Their inpatient units had experienced amazing surge of populations to the point that they couldn't treat their beneficiaries and populations. So they needed to solve the problem of how do I reach and deliver the care that my organization is known for into the people that need it. And so we've seen the home become the venue where psychologically we are comfortable and safe. We've transformed the home from our consumer world through banking, through retail, even through communication and work, to be the place where we are able to drive our life operations. And now health systems are leveraging technology to make that possible.
Yeah, and I also think about when you leave your bubble, so to speak, right? We've gotten used to this term during COVID. Even though you're going to where the services are being delivered, but you are unnecessarily and unwittingly being exposed to other things. Hospital acquired infections are a big thing, and a lot of people lose their lives because of that, or go through major trauma. And so, can you speak a little bit to that? And is that also driving? And what happened in New York with COVID, and people at post-acutes? Is that also a driving factor?
No, absolutely. And my view is, if you look at it as a fraction, there's a numerator and a denominator. And in this case, there's a clinical and an operational dimension that you can take into account. Clinically, we knew that more patients were sicker and more patients needed to be in the hospital. Operationally, the challenge there is, of course, how do we manage this surge of patients to make sure that the right patient has access to the right care at the right time? And this allowed us to use new solutions such as telehealth and the virtualization of clinical care delivery to treat patients at the home and leverage the home as an extension of the hospital. I always think of sports analogies, and we always think about Wayne Gretzky and, skating towards where the puck is headed, right? And I'll refer to this a few times during today. Phillips released a week ago the Future Health Index for 2021, massive undertaking surveying nearly 3,000 healthcare leaders in 14 countries. And what that survey found was healthcare leaders expect, on average, 25% of routine care to take place outside of the hospital walls in 3 years. So just imagine that. Imagine the idea of us extending the frontiers of where real-time care can be treated. And, if we lay homage to the actual futurist that thought of this, Dr. Topol, the home should be the next hospital, right? And through that, with technology, we can start orienting the things that allow that to happen.
And so I guess from an interoperability perspective, what are the building blocks of making that possible, right? I mean, you've got the sort of remote monitoring technology. you've got communication on some level, and then you've got sort of all the clinical documentation that goes along with running a hospital and getting paid as a hospital, right? That's required. What does that look like?
Yeah. What does it look like?
Yeah.
I'll put it this way. COVID forced health systems and healthcare organizations to build the plane while flying, right? They had to start implementing solutions that would allow them to continue to deliver care to their populations, support their sensitive providers that were obviously, maximized in utility and contribution. And of course, at some point, still recognize that there's a bottom line to making sure care is efficient. And so for Phillips, what we're trying to do is help stabilize those fluctuating infrastructures, right? Revisiting the technologies that have been adopted and hastily deployed over the past, it's amazing to say, more than a year ago, right? 14, 15 months ago, beginning on this journey of deploying technologies and workflows in the time of crisis, and now help them actually transform the right ones into the new standard of care.
Mm-hmm.
We see this because, again, new solutions are coming to play, whether it's just from an infrastructure standpoint that supports kind of a seamless continuum, such as cloud-based platforms, which certainly Phillips is investing in informatics solutions that allow us to serve the patient in the hospital, at the home, irrespective of location. We also need to make sure that data and the support of data is threaded through interoperability. I've got my little cheat sheet of statistics from the Future Health Index. It says here, two of the things that we found as barriers were the adoption of digital health technologies and the difficulties with data management were nearly 44% of those 3,000 individuals surveyed. And the lack of interoperability and data standards across technology platforms was nearly 37%. So these are real-time clinicians, executives at health systems today saying, we may have the right technology, but the technology is not, cross-pollinating and populating information. It is not communicating efficiently, and through it, we have gaps in care. And that's the friction that hopefully, we can solve together.
So we have talked about remote patient monitoring, and with that comes device data. So getting a little bit on the technology side, we're really talking about Internet of Things type data, time series data from many devices. And unfortunately, in healthcare, it's not just simple data. It's like complex data, right? From one device, you can get many things, and you're tracking those over time. What kind of infrastructure? And I know there is IoT infrastructure, and all cloud vendors, they provide some sort of IoT platform. What kind of infrastructure do you think it would take, or what kind of infrastructure is has Phillips developed or is working on that will allow both the healthcare providers, but the patients really get value out of this, all that data that's being collected?
Yeah, data is a positive thing, but it also can be a negative thing. Too much data doesn't allow us to make the right decisions cognitively to deliver and impact care outcomes. So to that end, really, through meaningful use, we have now digitized data in the sense that we can now collect it and put it into systems of record, right? Our EMRs. For Phillips, as we see the EMR and the utility of it, how do we now build upon it and evolve to a system of engagement that, to your point, Mrinal, not only passively provides the information that's accessible and can be queried, but also actively and proactively supports the care processes that clinicians, but also patients, are trying to live within, right? And I think that's very critical. So absolutely, I think what we realize is the platforms have to be open. They have to support the collection of multi-feed data, and that data is starting to also come from consumer devices, right? We're seeing consumer diagnostics such as the iWatch, such as wearable solutions, start giving consumers the power to ask questions, right? Such as, I'm going to go to CVS or Walmart because I've been diagnosed as potentially being hypertensive and start monitoring my heart rate. Now, every time that changes, do I call my PCP? No. I have to start trending this information and really finding at what points, at what inflection points do I want to engage my PCP or my specialist to actually change the course of my outcome.
Is that the responsibility of the patients, and how educated do we think our patients are going to be to really monitor those inflection points? I doubt it.
And I think that's part of the idea of me care, right? The idea that care is changing. Mrinal, when I look at the relationships we used to have with banks or with shopping centers and retail or even communication, we would take a check and take it to the bank and probably invest an hour of our time making sure that money was in our bank accounts. Whereas today it's as simple as taking a picture from my iPhone and it being relayed and put into the right account. So I think what we've recognized as consumers is we are more activated, and I think we're also becoming more self-directed. And really, I would say even personally, that realization has been forced upon us through COVID, where our life operations have been virtualized to where everything from a work to a worship to a working out is centered on my home. However, for me to get a prescription, for me to see a physician, ordinarily would require me to leave my home. And we now are saying we're increasingly intolerant of that because that's inefficient. How do we consumerize? How do we, as we say, the Amazonification of care, how do we make sure that we're at the center of care? And I think that organizations, as well as systems of government reviewing reimbursement, are saying, yeah, that's possible. You can take a more active role. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody is health literate, but we're seeing that unfortunately, punitively, we're being forced to be more health literate because of rising premiums and the inability to have care locally.
Yeah, isn't a artificial intelligence system gonna come to the rescue? I do hear about already a lot of data about if you are able to track just, let's say, your heartbeat or blood pressure or oxygen levels, all of these things that are you can get in your watch, for example, right? That you can predict early diabetes or things like that. That can be lifesavers if we intervene early in the process. So really, sort of the triple aim of healthcare that we've been working on, policymakers and as a nation, better outcomes, better patient satisfaction, and reduced cost of care. How do you think more sort of bringing it to the patient, bringing at home, making it more patient-centric is going to have an impact on the triple aim?
Well, as you mentioned with AI, I don't think there's a silver bullet that'll solve it all. But healthcare, and really if I divide that, health and care is now on the national stage because we realize there are populations that don't equitably receive care. We understand that the rising cost of care is unsustainable. And we realize that ourselves as a population is aging, which is going to tip the scale to one that requires more intervention over time. So we need tools to help us, absolutely. And we also need to make sure that to the triple aim, we appreciate the fact that our providers are a limited and scarce resource. So we need to make the time that we ask of them more relevant and more specific. And so truly, as we see IHI and the triple aim, we also see the quadruple aim, which is making sure that our patients and our care settings are efficient, but also our providers aren't burned out. And data is one of those massive contributors that forces those providers to say, we don't want to do this anymore, right? And that we can't tolerate that. That's not possible. We need them, and we need to provide them with a better way of using the skills that they've learned to help us live a better and healthier life.
I think some of that is, I mean, some of that too is sort of reimagining the actual work of a healthcare provider. I mean, when I think of Phillips in Baltimore, I think of Acute, right? And the sort of early innovation around virtual ICU. And I don't think anybody thought in the 90s that you would be able to deliver better care with fewer adverse outcomes for ICU patients by managing them. ICU patient in Salisbury on the Eastern Shore of Maryland being managed in a command center in Wilmington, Delaware, right? Like people didn't think that the care could be delivered that way. But it turns out that if you can harness the flow of data in the right way and empower intensive care unit practitioners the right way, they can do it better. And that's a different way of practicing medicine, I think, than maybe those docs in the 90s thought they were gonna practice when they were going through their training.
Change is hard, but if we can innovate solutions that allow clinicians to work or operate at the highest level of their license, we're being successful. And to your point, again, from our consumer world, when we look at our national transportation grid, or if we look at air traffic control, right? These systems are managed by a foundation of computer intelligence, right? Decision support that mitigates risk potential. And then, of course, leverages those scarce resources and whatever, of those three, domains it is, David, and says, now you take the cognitive decision making you've learned and apply it, right? And we see this, of course. Now, I'm also, very cognizant of the fact that no one organization can solve these problems. And I think whether or not we come full circle to hospital at home, or if we look at Phillips or we look at hospitals, what we realize is we all have to work together to make this outcome possible. We have been encouraged by the very progressive support of reimbursement policy and waivers. We have organizations like the American Telemedicine Association that are supporting our push for improved policy. And with that, I think change can happen. Change is hard, but if we work together, we can change today's standard of care to adopt technology into it.
And you touched upon the fourth aim. We and it's a big topic, but we talk about physician burnout and all that. And I think telehealth, telemedicine can help with that as well, right? So, we not being healthcare practitioners, we are able to work from wherever. COVID has made it even more possible with all the tools and everything, and we have seen that it works. Again, a culture shift, I guess, but telemedicine is here to stay, and it will help with that physician burnout you talked about.
It's also been interesting, I think, to see as I remember going to the ATA conference, 7 or 8 or 10 years ago, and there's been this sort of long argument about being able to license clinicians across state lines for telemedicine. And we've got this sort of 50 state patchwork of licensure, which Jake knows well from our provider directory work, right? You figure out how to get licensure data from one state, and you figured it out for one state. And it's a pain in the neck. The argument was always that if you allow providers to practice across state lines, you create, do you see a flood of demand because you've got suddenly, the ability for someone to get a psych consult from their living room that they might not have gotten before because they had to, drive to the clinic or drive to the psychiatrist's office. I don't think we've seen that in the last year and a half. You certainly don't hear the large insurers screaming about the flood of claims that have eroded their profit margins over the last year and a half because folks are using telemedicine. So I hope that we don't go back from this sort of natural experiment that we've had, and I kind of think that consumers will demand of the industry that we don't.
No, I totally agree, David. I think, sure, is there some, retraction that can happen? Of course, right? That happens in any kind of, bubble or influx. But I think we've seen such, poignant examples of how technology has helped reach individuals during this very trying time, right? I think again of the VA, where Phillips has partnered with the VA to implement the Atlas program, which is really bringing telehealth to populations of veterans across our country that may require otherwise to travel 2 hours to the local hospital. That's the opportunity to use retail when, a majority of our rural populations may be closer to a Walmart than they are to a hospital. So how do we make retail environments something where you can receive care? Which is not a remarkable idea. It's certainly possible, and we see examples of it happening. But we also see that our home is becoming a health hub, right? We have the opportunity to leverage technologies to communicate and inform clinicians anywhere that can then support our health and care.
Mm-hmm.
Karsten, I have a curveball for you. I've been thinking about this for a little bit. So you look at the current, main market electronic health record systems, and you say you got all this time series data that's going to come in. You got to be prepared for it. And I'm pretty sure there are projects going on, but they're not ready for this sort of different velocity and different veracity of data. You had some time series data with, flow sheets and others that they're good at, but they're not as voluminous, if you will, right? And so how do you think about in terms of system ecosystem in a hospital or a doctor practice? Like, do you think there'll be two different systems that work together, interoperate with each other? Or what are you seeing in the market, and how does Phillips have a viewpoint on this?
Well, I think clearly what we see is there's a need for platformization, right? There's a need for us to be able to support any organization's appetite for the adoption of technology. And what we also realize is many organizations don't begin from the same starting place or same starting line. And so why that's important, of course, Mrinal, is value, right? So what we've done in the past prior to platformization is offer a solution to everybody, the same solution, which means that depending on the appetite of the consumer, which is the hospital system or the IDN, they may not leverage or find the same value in all of the features and the modules that are provided. So really, this comes to why and how the partnerships are becoming bigger and more disintermediated, right? The idea that rather than 30, 40 different small bite-sized examples, we can really build upon an infrastructure as a service model, helping to scale, helping to personalize innovation. And really, to Phillips, of course, one example is how we're moving from being a transactional partner to one that's sharing outcomes and sharing the investment in how successful the mutual relationship is between a hospital and a company like Phillips. A great example there is what we've done with monitoring as a service at some very large health systems to look at a significant capital investment like monitoring and move it from that transaction to one that actually can deliver uptime value and KPIs that can be monetized by both parties.
Very, very interesting. Do you, again, another curveball for you probably, but how does Phillips think about, innovation and third-party apps? Like, if you are controlling the platform, for example, whether it's device data, device network, what have you, telehealth platform, how do you empower smaller, sort of startup companies to bring in a value? Let's just say, there's an app that's going to do just diabetes, early diabetes detection, right? Or heart disease related early detection. How do you think about third-party apps in your sort of ecosystem?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Phillips is still a remarkable organization because through our divesting of solution portfolios such as lighting, et cetera, we're now with a singular focus on health and care. And unlike many large companies like Phillips, we still retain our personal health division, which includes Sonicare, some of our ambitions in maternal fetal monitoring and mother and child, but also dentistry and oral care. And if we look across this entire space and our responsibility as Phillips Mrinal, we realize that our architecture, right, our health suite system of engagement needs to be able to aggregate the data not only from proprietary Phillips solutions, but also solutions from that ecosystem, right? And then the job becomes a little bit harder, right?
Yeah.
What do we do with this data? And this is really where I think Phillips can find its, point of differentiation, especially being a larger partner for larger systems, because we can aggregate that data, right? We can take the data from an internal diabetes or renal program and link it to a diabetes app that's collecting consumer data. And through that, then work on the appropriate AI. Back to the example of tele-ICU, is the value in having multiple ways to identify deterioration or a single way? And so really, there's sort of a curve where adding too many extra clinical decision support elements may not be as valuable as actually aggregating them and having one single source of truth and presentation of clinical deterioration. And I think that's where, if we can take the V's of data and consolidate them and bring trust and confidence, clinical confidence in how we present the output of it, that I think is really our ambition.
Great to hear.
There's some questions that have been rolling in from the audience, and I want to make sure we give them some time. One question is sort of asking about how we or maybe Phillips segment the in-home patient population. There's post-acute, there's chronic. I mean, do you all have sort of a rubric for thinking about that at Phillips?
Well, I think the most important thing to realize is virtualization is not compartmentalized. It really is evolutionary. And organizations are looking at this, David, from direct to consumer, which they may have tied to a payer plan, to patient or provider to patient models, which can come through an EMR's web app or chatbot, all the way up to chronic disease, and then obviously the newest area that we're seeing, which is acute at home, right? So we want to scale it, but it's less efficient for us to scale it if we introduce new platforms and new hardware at every level. So really what we want to do is flex and partner with the organization and the population, right, across that time. Now, many times, as we know from Cotter and other, business leaders, transformation fails when we do too much at once. And right now, as we're looking to move care or migrate care from the hospital to the home, we have to do so selectively. And that's another process with consulting to really help analyze what's the first population we want to solve for and their problem. And then how do we add to it? And as we look at the progression from chronic disease management to acute disease management in the home, we realize that we also want to increase the confidence with which we can support the outcomes. And so let's say we begin with a population of heart failure or diabetes or sepsis. We then can evolve those workflows over time versus recreating them every time we add a new population.
There's another question, and I may not be asking the question that this person intended, but I'm gonna riff on it a little bit. The question is about video, and as you probably remember, Karsten, I mean, when CMS first started paying for telemedicine, they required that video be part of it, and I think that was intended to be a sort of a governor on demand. Like if you start to pay for things that don't involve a video consult between a patient and a provider, you're sort of opening a Pandora's box. But video also feels kind of primitive in the world of Internet of Things, right? I mean, you might have 100 different threads of data coming into a command center about a patient, and you don't really need to look that patient in the face to know what's going on. So, I mean, what do you see as the role of video moving forward?
To me, it's an old quote. Sight is the most powerful sense, right? And so, while clinically, telehealth doesn't support, the tactile, evaluation of a patient that clinicians are known for, there's so much that the person-to-person video can do. But at the same time, we can also look at that as a reactive intervention, right? Whereas if we are being able to monitor, for example, blood pressure over 30 days, we can then see actually proactively where an intervention is required before the video consult is needed. And a video consult's also intrusive, right? And we have to realize that we want to be able to support health and care over the duration of a patient's experience, right? So clearly, I think video has a critical role, but at the same time, we realize that data can be transmitted without video being constantly on. And that allows us to kind of live a lifestyle where, almost like, my GMC product in my driveway, I have a clinical OnStar assurance program monitoring my, physiological being and what I'm doing, coupled with data from what I buy, coupled from my exercise, coupled by my search history for mood. And hopefully then it creates almost a digital twin that, helps, steer me in the right direction.
Right. And all of this at the end of the day ends up coming back to payment too, right? I mean, the system or the practitioners need to be compensated for performance. Like even today, like when I can send messages to my PCP through my chart and he'll respond, but he rarely responds with more than like one word. And part of that is because he's busy, but part of that is because he's not getting paid to respond to me. Like if he wants to make money, I gotta come in, or he's got to get me, up for a consult on video.
But we see that changing too, right? We see CMS supporting waivers that allow us to extend the use of remote patient monitoring to more populations for more conditions. And we see health systems moving from fee-for-service to value-based care, right?
Exactly.
Because it's not just the right thing to do, it's the necessary thing to do for sustainability.
Yeah, you're not going to pay for a message or, bits of data, related to monitoring. But as long as by value, then you can sort of all bucket it together.
Right.
And then the focus moves from, getting paid for service or getting paid for widgets to getting paid for outcomes.
Or, right. I mean, if I'm in if my doctor has me enrolled in a PCMH program and he's getting a monthly capitated payment, he's worried about getting dinged if something preventable happens to me, right? Because he wants to protect that payment. So,
but we also have to take it upon ourselves, right? I don't drive 150 miles an hour down to 25 because I know what will be in store for me, right? A, likely I'll get a ticket, which makes my life more expensive. B, I might, make my brakes, go faster, right? Which requires me to replace them. And by the way, medical debt is exactly the same thing, right? If we look at the rising rate of medical debt because we're more responsible for the co-pays and the premiums, we realize, I think, that we're incentivized to participate more in our care. And when we participate more in our care, we'll be more responsible. We'll elect to make choices that allow us to be healthier. And that could very well be that instead of us, reaching out to our PCP as frequently as we have, we may partner with our PCP in our cardiovascular care by buying a scale, by buying a blood pressure cuff, and actually tracking our progress to the combined goals of ourselves and our physician.
Mrinal, there's a question here that that I think reflects one of your favorite topics, the data deluge. The question is, we've been speaking about, in quotes, too much data not being helpful. What kinds of data are prohibitive, or what kinds of data do we wish we had more of?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, so we when we built the Maryland HIE CRISP, we had this notion that let's just get every piece of data that we want, right? And then at some point you're like, oh, there's too much data, and if you just are showing that whatever data was available, nobody wants to see it because it's just a lot of data and there's no curation of that data. So there's definitely something to be said about, especially when we talk about the velocity of data with remote monitoring devices. That's just reading heartbeats, right? I mean, it's not helpful. But as Karsten alluded to, what do you do with that data? Do you look for inflection points in that data? And does that trigger something? So I think, turning that data into information is what we're talking about here.
Right. So good. Looking at an EKG reading from 2017 is not actionable, right? It's not going to inform the care that might be delivered to someone in 2021. But being able to track the changes and the patterns in a data set over time, that is actionable. And Karsten, I think you were speaking to this a little bit earlier. The question is, how do you build the algorithms that turn that data stream or turn 100 data streams like that into decision support?
You're right. I mean, care is being decentralized, right? And so when care providers intervene, they need a longitudinal view of a patient's holistic health to make a more informed decision. And so patient data for data's sake is not only useless, but it's actually burdensome.
Yes.
And it can create friction. And so really the deluge of the data that you're seeing needs to be filtered into the actionable insights that Mrinal is saying. And that's where AI comes in, right? That's where, taking a clinical workflow today, adding virtualization or technology enabling that workflow and creating a new workflow. It's not, 1 + 1 = 2. It's one all over again, right? We need to create a brand new workflow when we adopt virtualization, telehealth, and informatics. And we're seeing leading organizations put forth a virtual first strategy where, for their emergency departments, they may say, let us innovate the new virtual, admission. And if it's better, then let's replace the old model of admission, right? And as we talked about Acute at Home, we're now asking the question, do you even need to be admitted to the hospital as your destination, or is your acuity something that can be managed elsewhere in a more efficient environment?
Yeah, can you operate on the patient at home, for example, right? I mean, I don't know.
There's, I think, one more question here that maybe we'll wrap up with this one. We could probably spend a whole hour on this one, but it's a really interesting one. So the question is, what at-home infrastructure is required to make connected health at home successful? And then sort of, what is the sort of security dimension of that too, right? Like hospitals are dealing with a wave of ransomware attacks, just like pipelines apparently at the moment, right? And so as you start to move this stuff into the home, there's no question that it creates ripe targets for intrusion, right?
Yeah, sure. And that is a, privacy and security question. But, if we look at Maslow and the hierarchy of needs, in our digital consumer world, I would actually say that broadband is now a need, right? That we actually now work in a world where not having it can actually affect our ability to live good lives, right? Whether it's education, whether it's work, or now even if it's health and care. And really 20% of, the US is still in those, deserts where we're not able to access them to support them with care. So to me, I think, equitable access to broadband should be a right that we all have. And certainly we're extending it that way. And unfortunately through that, we see, malicious attacks being more prevalent or possible. And so for Phillips, we obviously have to protect that sensitive health information across devices. We also want to help the administrators and providers and patients to have confidence in how that care is delivered. And of course, that takes time. It also takes evidence. And we are seeing, thankfully, new literature being published on the efficacy of telehealth, the efficacy of consumer engagement. And I think with that, David, we will see growing trust, and that will help us with adoption.
It's a sensitive topic for David. His internet doesn't work very well.
Yeah, we won't bring up Comcast on this call. I mean, look, the financial services industry has already blazed this trail, right? I mean, when was the last time that any of us went into a bank branch? Pretty much our entire financial lives, especially in the last year and a half, have been conducted at home and without cash. So they're, and with a manageable amount of risk to the individual, right? So there's clearly a way to do it.
Agreed.
Well, Jake, I'll let you kind of bring this home, but Karsten, thank you so much for spending the hour with us. This has been really fascinating, and it's cool to we live in the world of data and not so much in the world of the Internet of Things and devices and care delivery outside of the big health system. So it's fascinating to hear what you guys are working on.
Absolutely. Great to participate. Thanks for your work.
Well, yeah, I think that wraps it up for us today. Thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you very much, Karsten. It's nice to see you. And our next interoperability roundtable will be scheduled in the coming days. So stay tuned for that. And if you are interested in accessing our private data, access to that will be closing next week. So make sure you sign up at leaporbit.com/private-beta. And we will see everybody soon. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.